Nail-biter unfolding in a polarized Peru. The hard right's Keiko Fujimori, the daughter of a jailed former president, versus a populist political novice, the far left's Pedro Castillo. Which way for a nation beset by corruption and mismanagement, where COVID's only accentuated the inequality gap? Will the result clear the air in a Peru that's been through 5 heads of state in 5 years? Castillo has called for a rewrite of the constitution penned under his rival's disgraced dad, Alberto Fujimori. What sort of democracy? Much the same question Chile has been asking itself after recently electing a constituent assembly. More broadly, is Peru's increasing polarization a bellwether for a region where, after 2019 social protests, the pandemic seems to have only accentuated a hardening of views? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Peru's bitter political divide. Joining us from the capital, Lima, Henry Rafael, president of the Institute of Political Communication and Governance. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
From the Andes mountain city of Cusco, Trilce Oblitas Bejar, country manager for Producers Direct, an advocacy group for small farmers. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
And in the streets of the Peruvian capital, France 24 correspondent Thomas Nicolon. How are you?
I'm good, Francois. Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Thomas, talk about a nail-biter. The tide has now officially turned in favor of Pedro Castillo. It's a 26,000 vote margin as we speak.
It was to be expected. Pedro Castillo has overtaken Keiko Fujimori as votes from rural areas are being counted. And we know that these votes tend to favor Pedro Castillo. It's still a knife-edge election and anything could happen. Things could still go either way. Don't forget that there are votes from Peruvians overseas still to be counted, and this could still make a difference. Votes from Peruvians overseas make up for about 4% of the vote. So in this context of a very thin margin between the two candidates, this could still make a difference. But the votes from rural areas have spoken, and Pedro Castillo is now ahead.
Pedro Castillo is now ahead. And yeah, it was a near 6-point margin on Sunday night. For a brief while, there was euphoria in the Fujimori camp. Let's listen to the candidate.
Those results have undoubtedly been received with joy. But seeing that the margin is so small, it's also essential to remain prudent.
So, Thomas Nicolon, an appeal for calm we're hearing there. And we heard the same language from Pedro Castillo, calling on his supporters to remain calm. However, once the final ballots have been cast, it could be different.
It's reassuring to hear both candidates say that they want to wait for the final results and that they're asking their supporters to remain calm until we know exactly what the results will be. But we also know that this atmosphere could possibly change. Keiko Fujimori has said several times that she regrets not asking for a recount in the previous election, and she might do it in this election if she doesn't win. Pedro Castillo had said over the several weeks, he said several times that he would not accept the results if he was not the winner, but then he kind of changed his opinion and said that he would accept democracy and that his supporters would have to accept democracy. Although yesterday night, when the first results were announced, he said on Twitter that he expected his supporters to take the streets and make sure that their will was respected in this presidential election. So far, no unrest. Everything is calm. calm, and both candidates are asking their supporters to remain calm. But this might change in the next couple of days as the official results will be announced.
So, Henry Raphael, you heard it there from our correspondent. On the one hand, you still have a few of those rural votes coming in, and then you have the votes from abroad also expected. Which way is this ultimately going to go?
Actually, I believe that this is going to be a very tied up situation because almost 97% of the votes have been counted. And yes, we are expecting still 3% of the votes, but there is some amount of votes that are still in a fight, and they are going to be resolved in the table, on the table, not exactly, on the ballots. And abroad, as we might be seeing in the last few minutes, Keiko Fujimori has a broad lead against Pedro Castillo. I do believe that we will not know who's going to be the winner until Wednesday, when finally the electoral jury will tell us who's going to be the next president of Peru.
And if it goes to the courts, like it might for some of those contested ballots, how will that unfold?
I don't believe that this is going to go beyond the election jury or the organization who's running the elections. I don't believe that the ballots are going to be counted or recounted. I don't see either Keiko Fujimori or Pedro Castillo trying to go to the justice, to the Supreme Court or something like that. I do believe that by Wednesday, whatever the organization, the OMPE, the organization who's running the elections, tell us who's the winner, I do believe that both of them are going to accept the results.
Trilce Oblitas Behar, you agree?
I think it's important to maintain everyone calm in terms of respecting the results. I agree with that. I think it's a historic moment that we are witnessing here in Peru, in which a large part of the population has reclaimed a new democracy that is or can be built with a demand for change. And for that, I think calling for calmness and waiting for the official results is the right approach.
Is it a mandate for change when Pedro Castillo in the first round finishes tops, but with just little under 19% of the vote?
I believe
Well,
that,
I would
let me
just
put it
say
to
that
Trilce,
yes.
please.
okay.
All right,
What
thank you. I would say yes, because we are currently in a extremely complex global context, right? Like the pandemic has hit countries extremely harshly, and Peru in particular has had most of the highest death tolls. And this has represented a key moment for our political involvement, but also for a social reclaim of basic rights, which the current system that we live in has not been. As such, I think that the 19% that Pedro Castillo managed to get during the first ballot elections, I think that was quite key in order to understand that there is a sustained demand for change. However, there is also a voice that needs to be heard from by politicians and by different economic elites in terms of having the population saying that they are tired of how things have been managed so far, and that they are even rejecting some forms of political management. So I would say that the 19% of Pedro Castillo during the first round of general elections is still a demand for change because of that. Because if you take into account all the factors, explicitly I'm referring to the pandemic, there was still a high percentage of a population that was demanding change. And that was demanding change, not just from an ideological center, but demanding change that would imply a broader change for the majority of the population that has historically been excluded of development, of economic growth. So, yeah.
A demand for change. We could call up a map that shows in this second round how people have voted. And we can see that, well, it's just as polarized as the two candidates are. The parts in red are those that were closer to Castillo. And you can see those are the rural areas. The parts in yellow to Fujimori, the parts in yellow, Fujimori, and then the rest is sort of mixed in between the two. In some rural parts, Castillo's numbers as high as 87%. In the capital, nearly 2/3 in favor of Fujimori. Thomas Nicolon, is it about the second round? Is it about demanding change, the way we've just heard Trilce describe, or is it about rejecting the other? Both candidates, again, a lot of people are against rather than for, it seems.
It's a very good point. A lot of people are against instead of being in favor of any candidate. But there is clearly a demand for change in Peru. That's undeniable. People from rural areas, mainly poor people and farmers, have been feeling left out and forgotten by Lima, by the capital city, and by the traditional political system for years. And there is a demand for change. There is a demand for a political system and a country that's more inclusive, and a constitution that's more inclusive. And Pedro Castillo is undeniably a symbol of this, a symbol of people demanding change. It's still too early to know if he would actually lead to change if he was to win this election, but he is a symbol of this. Now, remember all the corruption scandals in the past few years in Peru. There is clearly a demand for change. Peruvians do not trust their politicians anymore. This is a fact. They want change, and to a lot of them, Pedro Castillo is change. He's not a professional politician. He's a primary school teacher, and to a lot of people, he is change, but to the other half of the population, he's dangerous. Well, it's still impossible to know what's going to happen.
Yeah, let's listen to Pedro Castillo. Changing the constitution, nationalizing natural resources, two of the pillars that he spelled out on the campaign trail.
We ratify that within the framework of a new constitution, we rescue Peru's strategic resources. The Camasi gas should be for Peruvians. We must nationalize the Camasi gas project. The gold, the silver, the uranium, the copper, the lithium that have just been handed over to other countries, it has to be for Peruvians.
Henry Rafael, your reaction when you hear candidate Castillo talking about rescuing the country's natural resources?
Well, I believe that Castillo has raised a good amount of votes based exactly on the topics that my colleagues were talking. First of all, the fight against the system and the economical system that we have in Peru, and also the natural resources has been to be developed here in Peru. However, I do believe that the other side, the other 50% of Peruvians are afraid of Castillo because they believe, the other 50%, right? They believe that Castillo is going to impose a communist system, a left-wing system for, also education and health. And I have the sense that this election has two emotional reactions. One side is a vote of protest, and this is kind of fear, and the other side is afraid of the other side. So those emotions are the ones who were running the emotion of the people in order to vote. I don't think this has been a rational vote. I believe the emotion has been the reason why people has been voting. they voted on Sunday. I don't, and that's why we need both of them. Both candidates has to be very cautious and very. They have to call to the count because the country is really divided, and if we do not find a point to converge, I believe that we might be, facing a social disturbance in the next few weeks.
Peru's been divided before. There was in the past. There was a leftist guerrilla movement and the such. But what you're describing right now, this atmosphere of people going to the ballot box with a bit of fear in their hearts and voting on emotion rather than rational arguments. How do you explain it? Explain that to us. What's going on in Peru now?
Well, that's a good question. Peru is a country where we have the highest rate of death for the pandemic, and this situation has only affected the people, in terms of health and lives. The pandemic has taken lives, but also in the economic side. So in that situation, one side of the people, I believe the people who has voted for Keiko Fujimori, they feel that the person who can affect the economy for the worst part would be Castillo. And that's why they went for Keiko, even though they don't believe in Keiko Fujimori. They fear that Castillo can affect the economy, and in that way, they're going to affect, the wave of, the life that they're having in the society. However, on the other side, I believe that the vote against Fujimori is really high and strong, and also that the sense that the corruption is still in the Fujimori side. They believe that they don't have to trust Keiko Fujimori. And although they don't feel that Castillo is going to resolve the economic situation in Peru, they prefer to vote against Fujimori. Not for Castillo, but against Fujimori. That's what this has been
what
an
kind
emotional
of
vote.
whoever wins, what kind of a mandate will the next leader have? I'll put it to our panel when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. Peru's polarized election. We're talking about it. We're talking about the fact that you have this background of corruption, 5 presidents in 5 years in that country, and you have the mishandling, some say, of the COVID-19 pandemic. With us to talk about it from the capital, Henry Rafael, president of the Institute of Political Communication and Governance, from the Andes mountain city of Cusco, 3,400 meters high. Trilce Oblitas Bejar, welcome back as well. You're the country manager for Producers Direct, an advocacy group for small farmers. France 24 correspondent Thomas Nicolon is with us as well. Good to see you. Trilce Oblitas Bejar, it's much more, you just heard before the break, Henry Rafael saying, much more a vote against than a vote for, when you break down reasons why people cast a ballot. You agree?
Well, I would say that it's important to understand that we are obviously in a context of a polarized election. That's undoubtable. However, I don't think it's as simple as to say that people with emotion only are voting for Castillo. People across the world vote with emotion. It is a fact that emotions are going to be present. But people are very rational as well, because their livelihoods have been improved, especially in the areas that have been forgotten by the state for longer than 2-3 decades. So the rational aspect is there as well. I wouldn't say necessarily that our country is choosing to go against someone, but there are political positions that have been standing strong, and those have been anti-Fujimori, but also we have seen during the last elections that people are taking a step forward and deciding to be more involved in politics, but also claiming a change. And I think that's quite important, because if you look at the situation of Peru, inequality is extremely deep. And inequality is extremely deep, having the results of COVID pandemic response, in which we have gone back 10% in our poverty figures due to the pandemic. There has been an increase of people in the informal sector, which is like a very, very big part of the labor in the country, that have lost their jobs. In the major cities, in Lima, this is a crucial reality, and especially in the regions where, for instance, the minerals and the resources are rich, there is a lot of poverty, especially in mining regions. So I think it's important to understand as well that rationality, it is part of the voting towards Pedro Castillo, and also understanding that the structures of the country have not been able, and of the model, have not been able to provide a response to a pandemic that has hit us quite hard. I would like to continue on also mentioning the aspect of inequality being present during the political campaign as well, because due to the concentration of the media, there has been a clear position towards supporting hatred speech, a discriminatory speech, a very classist speech, and also a discourse that was trying to put hatred first and trying to make people more afraid of what change could entail. And this discourse has basically meant public streets and panels put in major cities, talking about communism, talking about how people are going to lose their jobs, how people are going to lose their small businesses. We call bodegas small shops. And there has been a clear campaign towards putting fright and exploiting people's feelings towards the current political situation that the media has also pushed forward. And I think that inequality can also be seen there. So when we talk about emotion, I think we need to be careful as well, because people are tired, and they're not tired because they're only thinking about being afraid of what change could entail. They're tired because there is a political model that has not represented a better livelihood. And this has been specifically in the areas that have been forgotten by several of the last governments that have been in power. And as you were showing before, that map, I think it illustrates clearly the situation.
Yeah, let me bring in Thomas Nicolon on this, because this idea of how the two candidates were cast. Here in France, we've paid attention to one citizen in particular. Back in 2016, Peruvian Nobel Literature laureate Mario Vargas Llosa called on compatriots to vote against the daughter of Alberto Fujimori, the daughter of a thief and an assassin, he said. Now, Mario Vargas Llosa had lost a presidential election against her father. Fast forward to 2021, the same Mario Vargas Llosa endorses Keiko Fujimori. He has said it again this past week that contrary to previous votes, we're not going to elect a person, we're going to elect a system. That's what our rivals have decided. This former fellow traveler, Thomas, why is he now backing Keiko Fujimori?
Mario Vargas Llosa's opinion is the opinion of a lot of Peruvian people. You know, in the last few weeks, I've been talking to people everywhere, and a lot of them have told me, they told me, Thomas, I would never have voted for Keiko Fujimori in my whole life because of what she represents and because the family and the political family she's a part of. But now she's up against Pedro Castillo, and I'm going to vote for her. I have to. I have no other option. So you see, it's pretty much what Vargas Llosa feels, because a lot of people are too afraid. Remember that there is a past history and a trauma with socialism in South America in general, and a lot of people feel like socialism will necessarily lead to what's happening in Venezuela. And obviously the Keiko Fujimori team and supporters have insisted on this in the past few weeks, that Pedro Castillo will make of Peru a new Venezuela.
All right, so trauma linked to seeing what's going on in Venezuela. Isn't there a trauma linked to the Fujimoris? Back in 2017, Alberto Fujimori was temporarily allowed out of prison for medical treatment. At the time, let's listen to him. He apologized for his crimes.
I know that what we accomplished during my administration was on the one hand well received, but I recognize that on the other hand, I have also disappointed many of our compatriots. To them, I'm asking for forgiveness from the bottom of my heart.
So he asks for forgiveness, Thomas. And by the way, this is for crimes committed by death squads. This is for corruption. And his daughter was caught up in the Odebrecht scandal, which plagued several South American nations, including Brazil. Yet people are voting for the Fujimoris?
You're right. You have a very good point. There is a Fujimori trauma as well in Peru. It's not just about a socialism trauma. Fujimori was a very authoritarian president, and there were human rights violations, and a lot of people believe that Keiko Fujimori is the continuation of this. But still, the fear of something new, the fear of what Pedro Castillo could bring, is leading a lot of people to still vote for Keiko Fujimori.
Henry Raphael, she has said on the campaign trail that if she's elected, she will pardon her father. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that statement is being one of the key issues for the campaign, because although, yes, there is still a memory for, the people about what his father did when he was the president, there is also a amount of voters, especially the north side of the Peru, of the country, that they still support Alberto Fujimori, and I believe that the results of the first round were based on the support that Alberto Fujimori has in this part of the country, this side of the population. However, I also Henry,
I'm gonna interrupt you, unfortunately, because we're having Skype connections. It seems we're gonna try to call you back and fix it. Apologies for that technical difficulty, and get back to you as quickly as possible and pick up on your point. While we wait, let's listen to some voters who, while casting their ballots on Sunday, sounded, well, a little bit shell-shocked from all the political turmoil of the recent years in Peru.
Let's vote for the least bad one right now. After the pandemic and all that we've been through, I couldn't tell you how the new president will govern.
Whoever wins should do a good job. Let them stop fighting. This is terrible. The candidates only fight instead of presenting their proposals. People need help in the provinces.
Chircio Blitas Bejar, do you expect people to accept the verdict of the ballot box once it's all over?
I think in a democracy, it is what we stand for, right? We need to respect the clamor of electing a new president. And linked to that, I think it's important to also understand that there is a lot of uncertainty for a population that has been basically dealing with a pandemic that, again, has represented a lot of loss and economic hardship in the country. So I think it's important to call for respecting the results, the official results. But I also think it's important to understand that we are witnessing a historic moment in which the clamor of the people, or of a specific sector of almost half the country, is telling the rest of the world and telling our new government, our new future government. And that is that there needs to be change, and that we need to have our basic rights covered by the state. And this means health, education, an economic growth, but sustained economic growth, economic growth that is distributed across the country and that includes everyone. Indigenous peoples, people from the rural sector, and also people that have been part of an informal sector that is continuously exploited.
Henry Rafael, you're back. It looks like the connection's cleared up, so that's good news. When you see what's just recently happened in Peru, a constituent assembly, they were so fed up after 2019, after the social protests there. They had a constituent assembly. Most of those elected that constituent assembly are independents. It's early days yet. Is that the route to go, rewrite the Constitution, taking a step back from the political parties as they are now?
Well, I believe that's the reason why a good amount of people didn't vote for Castillo, because they believe that a new constitution is not going to be the solution to raise jobs, to improve the economy, and I don't think that the constitution or the change of the constitution is the path that the 50% of the people who support Keiko Fujimori wants. I also want to point out that when we talk about change, at some point, I believe that some percentage of the people who support Keiko Fujimori also want change, but a different kind of change. I think we also want a change because we all realize that the economy hasn't been well distributed, throughout all the country. However, the fear against Castillo, because the system that he wants to impose is a communist system, has made the people think that, well, we want change, but a change without becoming a Venezuela or Cuba, even worse.
Tricio Blitas Pejar, explain to us what constitutional change would look like. What needs to be changed in the Constitution from what it is now?
Well, the constitution debate, it's a broader one, but what Pedro Castillo is standing for, it's about having a first referendum that will allow people in the country decide whether or not they would want to change the constitution. And I think that's quite important to mention, because we're talking about imposing here, and that's not the framework that Pedro Castillo is saying. He's saying that we need to consult the people. We need to run by the people of the country if we want a new constitution. And why do we need to do this? Because similarly in the region, as other countries have undertaken a process of constitutional change, such as Chile right now and Bolivia, is because the constitution does not reflect what the country can do in order to have better livelihoods for the people. And what specifically this entails are different articles in the constitution that allow for concessions made to the private sector. And the constitution currently in the country has been modified more than 10 times and still does not represent that the basic rights of people, such as having the right to have your own household, having the governance and sovereignty over our natural resources, and also the role of the state in terms of like education and health, are not being part of the current constitution. As such, it is important to question if we need to rewrite our constitution. And I think that's a key question when we are talking about change, because we want to improve the distribution of the resources and of the income across the people, across the population, I mean.
So let me bring in Thomas Nicolon on this.
We talk about constitution, we are
right. Yeah. Let me bring in Thomas Nicolon on this. Thomas, this is really interesting because in past editions of the show, and we've talked about Peru, the debate was at the time, because there's been so many impeachments and removals from office of the presidents. The debate from office has been, the institutions in Lima, do they work or not? But listening to what Trilce is saying, we've since had 2019 and those social protests, then compounded by the pandemic. When it comes to change in Peru, is the conversation a very different one from before?
The conversation has changed, and Chile has led the way in this conversation. And it's true that the constitution in Peru, and that's why a lot of people are asking for a change, because the constitution is unresponsive to popular demands. Indigenous groups are underrepresented, and it's clearly a constitution. It's also a constitution that was written under an authoritarian rule, as many constitutions in South America were. And Pedro Castillo put his finger on something very important when he said that he wanted a new draft of this constitution, a constitution that would be more inclusive. The idea is accepted by a lot of Peruvians. Now, the risk, according to others, is that it might destabilize the country.
Henry Rafael, your thoughts on this? The Constitution, is it out of date?
Well, I believe that at some point that this is a question that the people has to answer in a new election. There is going to be a referendum. I think if Castillo wins, he's going to call for a referendum to see if the Constitution has to be changed. From my perspective, what has to be changed is the way how the model is taken. I don't feel that the Constitution has to be changed. What I do believe is what we have to change is how politics make policies, and how politics respect the Constitution, and how governments, regional governments, municipalities distribute the money that the state gives them to improve the economy of the people. And that's why I think part of the country who has voted against Castillo is saying that they don't want a system that, let's say, the president of the party of Castillo is Vladimir Soran. He's been questionable for stealing money from the region that he was leading. The corruption is a problem that has to be solved by the people who's taking office, whoever this is going to be. So I don't believe the Constitution is the key problem to solve the problems of the country. The issue is to make that the policy makers has to be more convinced that what they have to do is to work for the people, to distribute the money, for equality throughout all of the country.
And right now, whoever wins will have to deal with the pandemic. It's still there. It hasn't gone away. On that score, what's the takeaway from this mortality rate, which is higher than in most countries?
Well, I think that's going to be one of the problems that the next president is going to face. Peru is doing really bad, in terms of the pandemic, and the vaccination is being very slow, and the effect of the pandemic in the economy, again, is being very high. So I hope that either Castillo or Keiko Fujimori, they have to take, a fast action to at least control the damage that the pandemic is doing, and also to improve and accelerate the vaccination, even though I think this is going to be still done by the end of the year. So this is going to be a very, very difficult situation still for the rest of this 2021.
All right, much more to talk about. Unfortunately, we're running short on time. I want to thank you, Henry Rafael, for joining us from Lima. Trilce Oblitas Pejar from Cusco. Thomas Nicolon, our correspondent, who will continue to monitor those results as they come in. Again, it's a wafer-thin majority either way as the day progresses here. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate. More on our website, france24.com.